Lee, interesting. Very interesting! Look at his face! Just look at his face!
There are very few footballers who could join an already great team and make one of England's greatest managers believe everything was finally complete. That is exactly what happened when Francis Lee arrived at Manchester City. Joe Mercer was never known for empty compliments. When Lee signed, Mercer looked at his squad and delivered a sentence that followed Francis Lee for the rest of his life. He called him the missing piece of the puzzle. Think about those words. Not a brilliant striker, not a great goal scorer, the missing piece. The one player a great team still needed. Within a short time, Manchester City were winning the biggest trophies of the era. Suddenly, Mercer's words no longer sounded bold. They sounded true. But one question remained. What did Joe Mercer see that convinced him Francis Lee was the player his great Manchester City side had been waiting for? Subscribe, because the greatest football legends are remembered through the people who knew exactly how extraordinary they really were. Mike Summerbee saw it before most people understood it. He was not watching from the stands. He was inside the team, inside the dressing room, inside the attack. And when Francis Lee arrived, Summerbee felt the change straight away. Years later, he said, "From the moment he arrived, he changed us as a team." That line matters, because Summerbee did not say Lee slowly adapted. He did not say Lee needed time. He said he changed them from the moment he arrived. Before Manchester City, Lee had already been sharpened at Bolton Wanderers. Strong, direct, restless, difficult to intimidate. Joe Mercer knew exactly what he was buying. Not a passenger, not a showpiece. A forward who could force matches to bend his way. City paid a record fee for him in 1967. The pressure was heavy, but Lee played like pressure belonged to other people. Within months, Manchester City were champions of England. To supporters, he became a hero. To defenders, he became a problem. And to Summerbee, he became the player who gave City something they had been missing. Not just goals, edge, belief, a nastier kind of confidence. The kind great teams need before they start winning everything. When Colin Bell spoke about Francis Lee, he did not need a long explanation. Bell simply said, "You just give him the ball and let him do the rest." That was all. Coming from Colin Bell, those words meant everything. Bell was one of England's finest midfielders. He knew which forwards could be trusted when matches became difficult. Francis Lee was one of them. He never waited for opportunities. He attacked them. One mistake from a defender, one loose ball, 1/2 yard of space. Lee was already there. He played with urgency, with power, and with absolute belief. That was why Bell trusted him. Not because they wore the same shirt, because he knew if the game needed one decisive moment, Francis Lee could provide it. For Manchester City, Bell created chances. Francis Lee finished them. And together, they helped turn a great side into champions. When Malcolm Allison spoke about football, he rarely spoke about caution. He believed winning teams attacked. He once said, "Our approach wasn't about keeping a clean sheet and scoring one." Francis Lee could not have suited that philosophy better. He was never content to wait for chances. He went looking for them. He closed defenders down, forced mistakes, and turned pressure into opportunities. Lee played every match with the confidence that he could change it. That mentality was exactly what Allison admired. Manchester City already had gifted footballers. Francis Lee gave them something different. Relentless intensity, the willingness to fight for every ball, and the belief that the next attack could decide the game. That is why Lee did not look like a new signing. He looked like a footballer who had always belonged in Joe Mercer and Malcolm Allison's Manchester City. When Joe Corrigan remembered Francis Lee, he remembered the penalties. Not because Lee won them, because he finished them. Corrigan faced those penalties countless times in training. Years later, he admitted he could hardly remember getting near them. That tells a very different story. Critics laughed and called him Lee One Pen. Goalkeepers were far less interested in the nickname. They knew Once Francis Lee placed the ball on the spot, the hardest part was still to come, stopping him. Lee practiced relentlessly. He struck the ball with conviction, no hesitation, no second thoughts, just power and belief. That was why his reputation was built on far more than winning penalties. It was built on scoring them when everyone expected him to. When Norman Hunter spoke about Francis Lee, there was never much affection. Hunter believed Lee made life difficult, in every possible way, not just with goals, but with his movement, his strength, and the way he drew defenders into mistakes. Their rivalry reached its boiling point during Derby County against Leeds United. One challenge, one penalty decision, and suddenly, two of English football's hardest competitors were throwing punches instead of playing football. Both men were sent off. The images travelled across the country. It became one of the defining moments of 1970s English football. Some blamed Hunter, others blamed Lee. But one thing was beyond argument. Francis Lee had a rare ability to get inside a defender's mind. That was why playing against him was never just about stopping goals. It was about surviving 90 minutes without losing your composure. When Barry Davies described Francis Lee, he was not talking about tactics. He was talking about emotion. Lee scored against his former club, Manchester City. The cameras found his face, and Barry Davies delivered the words football supporters still remember. Look at his face. For years, many believed it was a smile of revenge. Francis Lee later explained otherwise. He said he simply loved scoring goals. That moment was pure joy, not bitterness. That tells you something about Francis Lee. People often created stories around him. Lee usually kept the answer much simpler. He loved football. He loved competing. And above all, he loved finding the back of the net. Sometimes, one smile says more about a footballer than 100 interviews ever could. When Dave Mackay brought Francis Lee to Derby County, he was not signing a fading star. He was signing a proven winner. Many believed Lee's greatest days were behind him. Mackay believed otherwise. He trusted Francis Lee to lead another title challenge. He was right. Lee became a key part of Derby County's first division winning side. Changing clubs changed nothing about his mentality. He still demanded the ball, still attacked defenders, still delivered when pressure was highest. That is what separated Francis Lee from many great forwards. His success did not belong to one club. He helped Manchester City become champions, then helped Derby County do exactly the same. Very few footballers can say they transformed two different champions. Francis Lee could. When Tony Book remembered Francis Lee, he did not begin with goals or trophies. He simply said, "He was a top man. They don't come any better." Those words mattered, because they came from someone who knew Francis Lee long before the tributes began. After football, Lee built a successful business. He became one of the few players of his generation to achieve major success away from the pitch. But football never really let him go. He returned to Manchester City as chairman. It was supposed to be a homecoming. Instead, it became one of the most difficult chapters of his life. Results declined. The club struggled. Supporters became divided. The man once celebrated on the pitch now carried the weight of impossible expectations off it. Years passed. Another battle arrived. Cancer. Francis Lee faced it quietly, away from the noise that had followed most of his football career. When he passed away in October 2023, football did not remember a nickname. It remembered a competitor. At his funeral, former teammates, football figures, and old friends returned to say goodbye. Joe Mercer had called him the missing piece. Mike Summerbee remembered the player who changed Manchester City. Colin Bell trusted him when matches needed winning. Tony Book remembered the man. Perhaps that is Francis Lee's greatest legacy. Not that everyone agreed with him, not that everyone liked him, but that the people who shared football's hardest moments with him never forgot him. And in the end, that tells us far more about Francis Lee than any goal, any medal, or any nickname ever could. Subscribe, because when the legends are gone, their stories become our responsibility.